Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming this morning to this press conference. What we'll be doing today is we're going to begin by showing our video of the Denunzio arrest. There'll be two versions of the video that we'll be playing for you this morning. One will be a real-time video, which Chief Sanchez will be showing to you from beginning to end. The second version of the video is going to be a slow-motion version with captions that we'll be playing for you. The Chief will be narrating at different points and perhaps pausing the video to emphasize some points that we would like to communicate to you. The storyboard that you see on the walls around you corresponds to the timeline depicted in the slow-motion video. It begins here on this side of the wall and proceeds around in this direction. It also corresponds to the display that you'll find in your media packets. Also included in those packets are a DVD of the video that we will be showing you today. Following the video, Chief Sanchez will be taking questions, and then following the press conference, I'll remain here. The storyboard with the timeline will remain up so you can get some closer shots of that if you like. One last thing that I wanted to stress before we begin is that the video that is enclosed in your packets and what you'll be seeing here today was captured by equipment that was installed in an SBPD patrol car. The slow motion portion of this video was created by Santa Barbara City TV staff. The Santa Barbara County District Attorney's Office is not connected with the production of this recording and in no way has condoned or directed its release. So with that, Chief Sanchez.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for being here. We'll be as brief as possible, and I'll take a few questions at the end. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about the arrest of Mr. Denunzio and the issues surrounding that arrest, specifically the issue regarding the officer's use of force on that evening. Due to community inquiry and concern and some questions about officer use of force, I felt it necessary to have a press conference to share with you the entire video, and as Sergeant Harwood mentioned to you, give you a copy of that for you to take with you. It's something to think about when we talk about officers' use of force. And the truth of the matter is that no matter who sees an officer's use of force, you're going to get many, many opinions. And we may not agree on what you see or what you don't see, or disagree with someone who sees it completely different, and we know that. Officers' use of force in Santa Barbara is rare. And I'm going to share some statistics with you in a little bit about how rare it occurs, but it does occur. And most of the time it occurs very quickly, where an officer has to make split-second decisions in an incident that is very tense. It could go from handcuffing all the way to deadly force, but it all happens very quickly most of the time. It really, truly does. And quick decisions have to be made. Over the last 3 years, the department has had 296, almost 297,000 calls for service. Of those 297,000 calls for service since 2008 to this month, we have used force 872 times. 872 times, which comes to 0.03 of a percent. 0.03 of a percent. We've used the taser in 3 years 146 times. But one of the key factors and one of the key statistics that I'd like to share with you, that in the last 3 years, I have had 118 officers assaulted. And I think sometimes that does not get put out there, because you see, when we take on this job, we know that putting our hands on people in a variety of ways, sometimes in a use of force issue, is something that we do. It's the nature of our business, whether we're helping someone across the street or going hands-on in an arrest situation. But rarely does the community get to hear that in the last 3 years, 118 times, my officers have been assaulted in the street. And I just think that's important to put out. Police officers in the United States are granted the authority to use force to accomplish lawful objectives such as an arrest, entry to serve a warrant, and to make an arrest or detention. That's Freeman v. Gore, 2007. The big one, if you will, is Graham versus Connor, 1989, where all use of force lawsuits are measured by that standard established by the United States Supreme Court in Graham versus Connor, 1989. And there's a three-pronged Graham test, if you will. One is, what is the severity of the crime that the officer believed the suspect has committed or about to commit? Number two, did the suspect present an immediate threat to the safety of the officer or the public? And lastly, was the suspect actively resisting arrest or attempting to escape? The Supreme Court in the Graham decision also shared unanimously that the reasonableness of any use of force is the officer's reasonableness, what he or she thought at the time, not what the community or the chief of police sees at the time, but at the incident, what the officer's reasonableness is at the time of the incident. That's what the United States Supreme Court says to us today and has said it since 1989. And the fact is, to use their exact words, because of the fact that law enforcement officers are forced to make split-second decisions and judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. I've been doing this a long time, and it's been my personal experience that, in fact, it does happen very quickly. Today we're going to show you, as Sergeant Harwood mentioned, the video in full speed and slow speed, and then we'll take just a few questions at the end. But I just felt it necessary to share with the community what it is that our officers deal with on a daily basis. And I truly believe that it'll shock the community that 118 times in the last 3 years my officers have been assaulted. That's why they're home hurt. Sometimes they don't come back to work because of the fact that they've been assaulted and injured on duty. It's something that we sign up to do, which is not to assault people or to get assaulted, but to help our community. And sometimes when we deal with arrests, things happen that we have to address very, very quickly, and in this case, that's what happened. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and show it to you full speed. I would really ask you, if you can, hold on to your questions till the end, because I believe that during the video and during my narration of the slow motion, I believe some of your questions will be answered through that. But if not, certainly at the end, I'll take just a couple of questions, several if you will, and then we'll end the interview so you can get back to your deadlines, which I know are important to you. So let's go ahead and play the video. This is Officer Tudor. You'll get some sound in a minute.
That is Mr. Denunzio's vehicle, which is stopped at the intersection right there, making the left turn.
You're going to hear the officer ask the gentleman to get back into his car very faintly from where you're standing. If you listen right now.
On 11:55. Tom 11. Roger 24. Code 33 on channel 1. Code 33 on channel 1. Roger 26. Roger 26. Last unit, you recovered. 25 confirming 35 also en route. 35 Roger 25. Roger 23X. Roger 35, one in custody, and copy 210, code 6.
The code 2.
Produce code 2, Silverado Plaza 3301 State. 23X. Roger 23X, 2014-55.
Before we show the slow-mo, the police jargon, we didn't really write down for you, but when you hear an officer say, code 3 cover, this means he's in dire need of assistance. His mindset is, I'm in a situation where I've got to go really hands-on with this person, I'm going to need some help. That's what code 3 cover means, and you hear that's red lights and sirens for the other officers to get to that other officer immediately. And that's exactly what happens. You see an officer get out, you see him take his gun out. He has no idea the reason for the gun coming out. He holsters it immediately when he gets here, and we'll show that on slow-mo, is because he has no idea what's going on. All he knows is an officer is requiring help, and he has no idea what's going on or what the other officer is facing. The other thing I want to make clear before we show you the slow-mo is that Mr. Denunzio takes on 3 officers combined for 1 minute and 7 seconds. It takes 3 officers 1 minute and 7 seconds to finally take him into custody. That, if any of you have ever been in a physical altercation, 1 minute is a long time. And yet he goes on for 1 minute and 7 seconds, and we finally, 3 officers it takes to eventually put him into handcuffs. We're going to show you the slow-mo. And again, you're all going to get copies of this, and I'll narrate as best I can. We'll stop it from time to time, and then we'll take some questions.
audio in the slow-mo. This is at 1/4 speed.
Frank, excuse me a minute. Are we going to go back to, I just wanted to point something out at the beginning, if you will, of the Las Positas drive. Where's
I'm not
driver?
sure that's captured in the
Okay.
slow-mo.
Okay, well, leave it there for a second. In the regular speed, you saw that Mr. Denunzio is going back and forth in the lane. You hear the bumps. You heard those sounds. Those are his tires hitting the bumps in the middle of the road on Las Positas. He goes over. He changes lanes 3 times without signaling. Eventually, he does signal going into Gelson's parking lot. He clearly sees the officer activate the lights. But on Las Positas, if you saw and if you heard, he's on those bumps in the middle of the road. Then the stop goes into the parking lot. So we'll pick it up here in slow-mo, and I'll go ahead and narrate for you. Mr. Denunzio could have selected any of these places to stop. He chose a different space. He didn't pull immediately over. Not a big deal, just thought I'd point it out. The lights have been activated, as you saw. The lights were activated as he moved into the parking lot of Gelson's. At this point, the lights are still on. If you look at the back of his truck, the police lights are still on. His door begins to open. It's highlighted for you a little bit. You can see him there a little bit. At this point, the officer states to him, and you heard it earlier a little bit, I hope you did, it was there, get back in the car. Again, Denunzio exits vehicle, ignoring officer's command to stay in the car. He's looking right at the officer. Officer's pointing at him to get back in the car. Normally, with lights on you and a police officer telling you to get back in the car, a reasonable person would get back in the car. The officer grabs his arm, and Mr. Denunzio never complies with the officer's commands. He does stiffen his arm, and the officer reacts to it and pushes Mr. Denunzio against the vehicle. Officer Tudor performs a leg sweep, and Mr. Denunzio goes down. The officer continues to attempt to pull the arms behind Denunzio's back to no avail. At this point, Denunzio continues to stiffen the arm, resisting the officer, and if you see there, the officer is now on the ground. The officer falls to the ground and loses control of the struggling Denunzio. The officer is now on the ground, and both of his hands are on the ground. Officer regains footing. Denunzio continues to resist officer's attempts to control Denunzio's arm. Officer gets on the radio, which means he had to get one hand off of Mr. Denunzio and asks for another code 3 cover. This is the first use, and you can see it in fast motion as in slow motion, the first use of a tactical knee and hand strikes by the officer after 16 seconds of continued resistance by Mr. Denunzio. These are options that we train that are legal and appropriate and are within our department policy and within the penal code. When you see this in slow-mo as you're looking at it now, but as you look at it closely, you'll see, thank you, the open palm. That is how we train. And it's with an open palm that he's making some strikes to the back of Mr. Denunzio's head. Go ahead.
If I could just back this up one moment, is there's an important part here that should be observed is Mr. Denunzio's arm reaches out to try to shuck the officer off. You'll see a quick arm motion coming off to the side.
The officer attempts to use the taser for the first time. As you know, he did activate it. as Denunzio attempts to stand. The officer intentionally uses the taser in a drive stun mode, which reduces taser's effectiveness. Stop it right there for a second. The reason he did not activate the darts that would have been more effective. He's activating it, what we call dry stun, to get his attention and get a little pain compliance. The officer felt that this was important at the time because of the close range. However, even at close range, we could use the darts. The officer chose not to. None of us should try to get into the officer's head, as you wouldn't want someone to do with you when you're making some quick decisions. So there's no criticism on the officer. It was just an option that he used. Go ahead. The captions are also on your slow-mo, by the way. Those are taser activations and applications. Denunzio resists and defeats the multiple uses of the taser by moving away and breaking the taser contact. The gentleman there to your left is the security guard from Gelson's. At this point, Denunzio kicks the officer's leg. He actually kicks Aaron 3 times. Taser still ineffective. They're going to go off camera now. The officer arriving. The first backup officer arrives with the gun drawn due to the emergency nature of the incident. Again, he does not know what Officer Tudor is dealing with. Second officer arrives, but he's coming from the other side of that vehicle. He's out of view of the camera. At this point, the officer obviously reholsters. And again, for another 1 minute and 7 seconds, you've got 3 officers on Mr. Denunzio. He's resisting the combined efforts of the 3 officers who are struggling to handcuff him. And finally, at 7:49 p.m., the Code 4 suspect in custody goes out over the air. But that's a full 1 minute and 7 seconds that he's taken on 3 officers at the same time. That's called resisting, in my opinion. Okay. You hit the lights now, please. Questions?
Was the stun gun actually delivering whatever drive stun, shock or whatever?
Well, you know, there were about 13 activations, and activations and applications are two different things. It doesn't take much to pull that trigger. There are several where he actually activates it that don't touch Mr. Denunzio. There are certainly some that do. I do not personally know exactly how many did actually touch him, but we do know, because records are kept in that taser, how many times the trigger is pulled. So there's a difference between activation and application. There certainly are some. They were ineffective.
At the beginning of the first video, what was Officer Tudor doing? You could see him run back to his car. Where was he? What was he doing?
He was over near Borough Beach. As you know, Officer Tudor is our DDT officer, drunk driving team officer. I don't know exactly what he was doing. He was outside of his vehicle. As he turns to go back to his vehicle, he notices a vehicle coming towards him with no front plates. And he decided to go follow that vehicle with no front plate, which is a vehicle code violation. And that was his initial observation before he left to follow it. That was all his observation was at that time.
Was he in a place where he could observe the parking lot at Aurora Borough Beach or the boathouse, or did he see Denunzio come out of the boathouse? Or
I don't know that.
Why the disclaimer about the DA not condoning this or being a part of this presentation?
Well, I don't know if we want to call it a disclaimer necessarily. I just wanted to make sure that people understand that the district attorney has the authority to do what the district attorney does in terms of a case. She and I are friends and colleagues. We get along great with the district attorney's office. She knows, and she and I have discussed it. I respectfully disagree with that decision, but that does not mean that there's an issue between the DA and myself or our offices. We have a fantastic and wonderful relationship with the DA. I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is something we had been planning all along, whether all charges or no charges were going to be filed, because of the fact that the community was asking, what is this use of force? We were going to do this anyway. So in terms of a disclaimer, I'm not sure I would call it that. I just want to make sure that all of this that we have is from our video being released by the chief of police, not the district attorney, because I don't want anyone to even think for a second that we're trying this case in public in the media without the other charges being heard in a court of law, which is Mr. Denunzio's right. This is just something I wanted to answer for the community, because there were concerns about what is use of force and how is it used and why is it used. So today we're not here to discuss the 148 Penal Code. We're here to discuss what the chief of police decided based on my observations of this video. It was my conclusion that nothing out of policy happened based on what I see in this video, and that's the reason for the verbiage on why the DA even had to come up in this press conference today. Yes, Beth?
Was it tough in any way for you to make that final decision based on video that you don't see, based on activity that's outside that camera frame?
Well, first of all, any use of force, even when we use it legally and appropriately, is never pretty, ever. It's something that people aren't used to seeing. You see it on television, you see it in TV shows, where the actors eventually they say cut and you get up and everybody goes home. In the real world, that doesn't happen all the time. And in the real world, it's not always pretty. What I did after viewing this many times is to look for something that I felt might be out of policy in what I observed. If there are other videos out there, I haven't seen them personally. Any other audio tapes, I haven't heard them personally. But when the community says, Chief, what are you going to do about this? What I'm going to do is look at it, and based on my observations of what I see, and the decision, to be quite honest with you, was not very hard, because like several other people in this room, I've been there. I've done that. I've been hurt by suspects. I spent time in the hospital because of going hands-on with suspects. I know that this goes quickly, and that we have to call on our training and our knowledge of the law as to what our limitations are. And I believe, based on what I saw, that the officer used nothing out of policy in bringing this to conclusion. So no, it wasn't hard at all for me. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what kind of verbal warnings, if any, he was giving Denunzio during this whole incident.
Well, the one that you did hear is the only one that I hear. In the reports, it states a few things. I don't know what they are verbatim. I have not looked at the report purposely. Just dealing with this. That's going to be handled in the court of law with regards to the DUI and all that sort of stuff. But they are talking. The other officers are also talking. We will find out down the road that people are trying to get him to get on the ground. So that's the best answer I could give you. What you heard is what I heard. Another question. Yes, sir.
Based on your experience and looking at this video, don't you think that the officer could have handled this better?
The officer, in my opinion, handled it appropriately. There are a variety of options to use. And since I've been there and done that, there are a different variety of things that you can do. And they're all appropriate. And they're all necessary. And that's all he did, was what he believed. Remember, the United States Supreme Court says that the presumption and the biggest opinion in any incident of use of force is the officer's perception. What the officer believes he needs to do at that moment. And it happens so quickly, and we have to think of doing things so quickly that at times we use what we believe to be appropriate, and I believe it was appropriate. No, I do not. I think the officer made appropriate moves and used the appropriate trained options that he had within the law. Yes, ma'am.
Is it typical for an officer to approach someone physically so quickly after getting out of their vehicle?
It all depends on the situation. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I think that if an officer gives a command or a directive to a person to get back in the car and they purposely don't, they know it's a police officer and they're staring right at him and the officers tell them to get back in the car and they don't, I think the officer needs to move in there quickly. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if he's armed or she's armed. We don't know if they're going to try to run away and get into a foot pursuit. We don't know if he's going to run into Gelson's and create a problem for customers in the store. So the officer uses what he believes to be his best objective, is to control that situation in a very confined space, basically in his mind, a confined space where he can control the suspect and at least start to talk to him and dialogue with him. So there was nothing wrong with what he did. I believe that had the gentleman gotten back into his car, first of all, none of you would be here today. I wouldn't be standing here today. And the officer would have been spoken to and probably approached much slower than that had he remained in the car. When an officer tells you to stay in the car and you know it's a police officer and their lights are on, a reasonable person who is induced is going to comply with the verbal commands. And that was his first thing. He did not run up on the guy and then say get back in the car. He directed the gentleman twice to get in the car, and he chose not to. So I believe that the approach to the vehicle and to Mr. Denunzio was appropriate.
And just to clarify, in forming your belief, you base that just on this video, not on reading a police report or witness statements or talking to Officer Tudor? It's all based on this video?
What is based on this video?
Your belief that excessive force was not used?
Correct. Based on what I see in the video, and based on what some of the witnesses said in a complaint to us, that is what I base my decision on. There are things that happen outside of everyone's view here that none of us in this room have seen. Maybe some of the other witnesses have seen it. I did not. And the only thing I could do is base it on what I observed. And the answer is yes. Based on what I observed in this video, and only this video, do I believe there was no excessive use of force. The officer was appropriate in his approach, and I truly believe that Mr. Denunzio definitely resisted throughout this whole incident. The proof really is in the pudding at the end of the day, because if you notice in the video, we're all standing here watching. I didn't have you watch all minute and 7 seconds, but we're still waiting for these officers to take him in custody, and that's a minute and 7 seconds later. That does not mean he's complying. That means he's resisting. And at that point, he's resisting 3 officers at the same time.
All of that is out of view
Well,
for the remainder of that, whatever that.
out of
remainder
view of me and you in this video,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, and you said you have not talked to Aaron Tudor about this.
Correct.
Correct? Why, I guess, why doesn't a police chief talk to one of his employees about something he does?
Well, because we have a process in law enforcement. It's called the Officer's Bill of Rights. And when there is an investigation into any allegations of misconduct, a lot of other things have to happen to stay within the rights of the police officer before the chief of police talks to the officer. And that's part of the process.
So if witnesses claim they saw Tudor use a closed-handed fist to subdue outside this shot, would that have been within protocol at that point?
What do you mean within protocol?
Would that have been correct police procedure in trying to subdue Denunzio?
At times it is, Beth. At times it is. You know, part of our training is when we're going hands-on with someone and when they're resisting, we do at times use a closed fist. We use a closed fist. I'll do this as quickly as possible. We use a closed fist to strike something soft, and we use something soft to strike something hard. And the reason is because when you use the open palm, let me back up. If you use a closed fist on a hard object like a head, and the officer hurts his hand, how am I going to handcuff him now if I'm hurt? That's why we do that. At times it's appropriate. In certain locations of anatomy it is appropriate, and at times it is not. And at times we just have to make that decision in about a half a second. I'm going to take two more questions, and then we'll be done. Beth, go ahead.
What is the camera setup? What is the type of camera that's used on the dash cam?
I don't, you know, I've got to tell you that, and this is currently out there, we are looking at a variety of vendors right now to install cameras in all our vehicles. We're looking to try to find an avenue of funding for that. This is the only camera. This was a camera that was put on Officer Tudor's vehicle because we've been looking at cameras and trying to find funding for that for the future, because I believe that cameras will assist us and the community if we had them. It is at least a $225,000 expense that I do not have. So over the last few months, and about a week or two before this incident, we had met with a vendor who loaned us this camera. That is the reason that camera is in Officer Tudor's vehicle, because that's
the only squad car with the camera.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Do you know the name of it or the?
I don't. Someone that my staff could tell you that. And yesterday we looked at another vendor because we are continually seeking that. Now, when I mentioned, someone mentioned about, I didn't talk to Officer Tudor. There is currently an internal investigation going on because we did get some complaints from 3 individuals in the community. So when that happens, we don't take it lightly. I initiate an internal affairs investigation, which is ongoing. It is not complete yet. But I will tell you that 2 of the people who made the complaint that initiated the internal affairs investigation have now refused to talk to us. However, I will tell you that another witness who was adamant that Officer Tudor was in the wrong did come and get interviewed by our internal affairs sergeant. We did show her exactly what we just showed you. She stood up, recanted, and said, "That guy is resisting. That guy is kicking your officer. I'm sorry I said what I said. I guess I really didn't see it the way I said." But the investigation is still ongoing, and that's as far as I can. That's as much as I can tell you about that, because it is an internal affairs investigation. It is a personnel matter.
Do they talk to you? Do they?
No.
Internal Affairs does not
Right.
talk to you about your...
Oh no, the internal affairs officer talks to me about how it's going, but I do not speak to the witnesses. No, I do not.
No, I mean, do you tell them, for example, I've looked at the video and I think he did everything within protocol. Is that part of the internal affairs investigation?
No. The internal affairs investigation is about not what I saw. It's what the complainant saw, or their allegations. And they're brought in, or we go to them, we audio tape it, we tape the conversation, they know that. We ask appropriate questions, and we just kind of let them go. We just kind of say, what did you see? What would you like? What do you believe your allegations are? And could you please share it with us in detail? And we spent 3 or 4 hours with this resident, and she did that. But once she saw the video, especially the slow motion, she felt bad, and she said, you know, I want to recant this. I want to go back to the DA and recant this. I did not see what I thought I saw. And that's always good. But at the end of the day, none of us in this room will condone drinking and driving. And I think when our officers are out there making observations based on their training and experience to pull a vehicle over, and they're within the law and they have the probable cause to pull it over, and it's a deuce, we're going to do something about it. And it saves Mr. Denunzio's life, it could save someone else's life, we don't know. The traffic accident never happened. And that's a statistic we can't keep. We just believe that in this case, and the only reason for this press conference is to share with the community, but this is a tough job. And things happen very quickly. And my officers do a great job. No one's perfect. But when you're within the law and certainly within what the United States Supreme Court tells us about uses of force, this passes that test. I'll take one more question and then we'll be done, and you can walk around and ask some of my experts on video cameras what you might want to ask them. One more question. If not, we'll be done for today. Yes, one more.
Why it took so long for him to initiate the traffic stop in the first place? I mean, if he saw he wasn't within the vehicle code when he didn't have a front license plate, why did he wait so long?
That's an outstanding question, and I actually have an outstanding answer. If you notice in Las Positas, when you turn left or right from Meigs or Cliff, there is nowhere to pull over there. You've got a bike lane where people jog and ride bikes. You remember a couple years ago that lady who was killed on that same bike lane on the other side of the street? You cannot pull over a vehicle in Las Positas going either way. It's unsafe for the driver being pulled over. It's certainly unsafe for the officer, and it's unsafe for the people coming behind. Coming over the freeway, you saw the traffic on both sides, and then he crosses over Modoc, and he crosses towards the golf course. Same thing. There's no curb. It's a bike lane, again putting everyone in vehicle danger. So we will pull over a vehicle, and if you remember, how many? I'll ask this question. You don't have to answer. The red lights in a police car go on. Many times people will panic and they'll pull over immediately. Might not be a good idea. So we train our officers to eventually put the lights on when they believe that they're approaching a safe place to pull over, and that's exactly what happened in this case. It was completely unsafe everywhere in Las Positas to initiate the lights and have this person pull over. You put a lot of people in jeopardy that way, and the officer did exactly what he is trained to do. I want to thank you all for coming today. Pick up your packets. And I just thank you for taking the time, for giving me the opportunity today to share with you some of those thoughts and some of the things that our officers deal with really on a daily basis. Thank you all very much for being here.